As many of us know by now that we're required to have a presentation from Department of Fish and Wildlife prior to our duck dash to kind of remind us about the mud snail issue and what to look for, and especially those of us who are on the pickup and retrieval end of it. They want to make sure that we can recognize some of these things when we see them so that we don't end up getting them back into the lake or some other area that could be an area for them to expand. So today we're going to have Jesse Schultz, who's an environmental specialist, going to come and fill us in on this and update us on this issue that we, especially those of us who are on the retrieval, need to be aware of. So let's welcome Jesse Schultz.
My name is Jesse Schultz. I'm with Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thanks for having me here, even though it's kind of a requirement through the Department of Enterprise Services, because they're the agency that actually manages Capitol Lake. So my agency, Department of Fish and Wildlife, we advise them on the New Zealand Mudsnail issue and the nutria issue. And Larry called me the other day, and I kind of dropped the ball. I didn't give him too much information about myself. Sorry about that. Things are a little busy. Our department is trying to get Puget Sound open for salmon this year. I don't know if anybody's heard about that. Great. Right. So just a real quick background before I get into the snails about myself. I've been with Fish and Wildlife for about 15 years. Started pretty young. Grew up in Centralia, Tiger Pride, and then went to Peninsula College and then transferred to Evergreen. So it was a little different going to Evergreen when you like to fish and hunt a lot. So the snails. So, the first detection of New Zealand mudsnails in the United States was in Idaho in 1987. So that was ground zero, and it's pretty difficult to actually pinpoint how the snails or how any invasive species gets to a place like Capitol Lake. We'll probably never know how they got into Capitol Lake, but for the Idaho detection, it's 99% sure it was Idaho Fish and Game that brought in some trout that were infested with snails from out of the country, and then they have a real similar program to our program where we distribute trout for anglers to catch, and that's what Idaho did, and that's how they kind of spread throughout the country. Okay, and you can see now, 2016, this is all the detections, but we know there's snails in a lot more states and places because nobody's really specifically looking for the snails, and we know when you're specifically looking for something, you're going to probably find it more often. Okay, but closer at home, Washington. So you see in 2009, Capitol Lake got detected. That was the first eye-opener for Washington because it was right across from the Capitol in the lake. And that was an eye-opener. So then there's limited resources were focused on how are we going to start managing them. And from that, you can see up in that cluster is Lake Washington. So then Lake Washington, we started to look for them, and we noticed, well, they're pretty much throughout Lake Washington, but they're in very small creeks. No users use them. There's no recreation going on in them. So how are they spreading in those lake streams? So I'll get to that later. And I just want to show down in the right-hand corner, you can see that says Ringgold Hatchery. So that's the Fish and Wildlife hatchery that got infested with New Zealand mudsnails. And so from there, we don't want to be like Idaho, where we start just distributing fish everywhere that are infested with New Zealand mudsnails. So from there, the fish go through a very fancy purging. So we'll try to get the fish as fat as possible, and then we cut off their feed. They become saturated, and then they let all that feed go, And so if any snails are in them, they pass through, and then we distribute them. Because we know the snails, the fish could eat them, they'll still be alive, go off, and all it takes is one snail to reproduce. Yeah. Real quick, just about biology. New Zealand mud snails are native to New Zealand. These snails are the perfect invasive species. They're a boom or bust critter. So they're mass producers, they're short-lived. So that's versus a orca whale, long-lived, very slow reproducing, very few young. With any invasives, they're gonna just boom or bust. So the biggest indicator with these guys is their size. If you ever see a tiny, tiny snail, there's not too many native snails in Capitol Lake that we're gonna get confused. Especially they have an opening. It's called a percle, and a lot of our natives do not have this percle. I'll show you on the next picture. Okay, so when I said that it only takes one snail to reproduce, because they're all clones. They're all the exact same critter. Even from the Great Lakes to Capitol Lake, they're identical, and they're all females. So that's what, so if we miss one snail from decontaminating from the duck dash, and say that rowboat or drift boat goes to another place and there's only one, it goes to Mud Lake or Black Lake or something like that, it could possibly reproduce and start a population. So that's what makes these guys the hardest to decontaminate, because it only takes one. So in the bottom picture, right when they're born with their embryos. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. So if you guys get anything from this, it's just, if you ever see a snail like this, give us a call. We have hotline, app, everything, and then we'll go out there and investigate, see if it is a New Zealand mud snail. So going back to their size, they're very small, and then that percle, it's just like a percle on a fish, a gill plate on a fish. Very few native snails have this opercle, and that makes them really tough too, because as we found out, when they get stressed out, they'll clam that opercle and nothing could get in them, such as a chemical or salt water to try to kill them. So the New Zealand's, they could be all types of different colors. We've seen them from white to blackish, so color is not a good indicator to go off. Okay. So here's a couple so you guys could compare with different snails. So the far left is in New Zealand, and then the snail right next to it is a lamidate. So that's going to be the most common snail in Western Washington, especially Capitol Lake. Capitol Lake has millions of the lamidate too. But you could even, with the naked eye, see it's not too closely resembles it. Yeah. So why do we care about New Zealand mud snails? Yeah. So as I was talking to Larry earlier, we have to use the word may and possibly, because there's no money in research for New Zealand mud snails. But we do know from other parts of the world, this is what happens. So they're grazers. So when you have the densities can get up to about 500,000 square meter. So if you just take a meter, make a square out of it, and you figure there's 500,000 snails. That's a lot of critters. So they got to eat, right? So they're taking out all that detritus and primary production that would feed the food web. So the really good insects that we want, caddisflies, stuff like that, that fish would eat, they're going to get bumped out because they're not going to be able to compete as good with them. And of course, they do carry a parasite that we would love to try to test for, but if we ever got some budget, we could do that. Okay, so what about predators? Well, in New Zealand, they're kept checked by a flatworm. It just goes inside, attacks them, kills them. We don't have that parasite, flatworm, in Washington, and we're not going to bring the flatworm in Washington because biological control is very difficult, especially permitting, and usually it backfires. But we do have our one native crayfish in Washington, the signal crayfish. Everybody's crayfish, they're throughout Washington. They're a great predator, but when the numbers of New Zealand's mud snails get too big, the crayfish just can't keep up with them. Okay. And then going back to the risks is the classification, the Revised Code of Washington, RCWs. New Zealand's are listed as prohibited, so you can't possess, transport, pretty much anything to do with them. So once they're classified as prohibited, then it's up to the Department of Fish and Wildlife to deal with it. Okay. So that's a little brief history on the snails. And so what are we doing about it, though? Okay. So the snails were detected in Capitol Lake in 2009. And does anybody remember the backflush? Okay. That was a great experiment because it was a negative. But any data is good, so we'll never try that again because we realized Bud Inlet during low salinity is 10 parts per thousand. If you think of the Pacific Ocean, it's about 33, so that's very low salinity. So by the time it mixed with the Deschutes and Percival, it was really low. So we could cross that off the list of trying backflush. But then what about dropping the lake again and then using freeze? So we've done this multiple times, and we actually got to publish a paper about this because it was great success. We determined about 98% of the snails died that were affected around the edges of the lake. So anytime you get a cold snap, and it costs no money to just drop the gate, drain all the water, the freeze, and it's kind of weeding or maintenance. So last year we never got any cold temperatures to do this. Last time we did was in 2014. But hopefully this year we'll have a decent cold winter and we'll do it again. It kind of keeps the snails at check around the edges. Okay. We've conducted a 5-mile radius. So Capitol Lake, just put a circle around it 5 miles, surveyed all the water bodies around Capitol Lake. So we've done that 2010, 13, and then last year. So it's pretty hard to believe, but we have detected no New Zealand mudsnails in that 5-mile radius. So that's great data, so we're going to continue to do that, and that's going to be our perimeter. And so you can kind of twist it and say Capitol Lake is closed off, and it's bad because we don't want to reduce opportunity for recreation. But maybe the reason why there's no snails outside of Capitol Lake is because we have closed it off. Okay. And then how do we detect snails? There's nothing scientific about it. We just basically go look at all types of structure, artificial structure under rocks, leaves, fosters, anything. And then not just closing off the lake to recreation, but everything else that goes into Capitol Lake. Like we have a collection facility. Everybody knows our little hatchery right by Falls Terrace. So we have coho, Chinook, but then there's cutthroat trout. So during the fall when the Chinook and the coho come up, right when they hit the pretty much Bud Inlet, they're not eating. Their esophagus closes up, so we're not too worried about the salmon eating the snails because we bypass them to the upper Deschutes to try to get some spawning going on. But we have looked at them, we've had pumped stomachs, dissected them, so we're not worried about the salmon. But cutthroat are multiple spawners, so they could go out to the saltwater, go way up in the Deschutes, spawn, go back out, a year later come back, so multiple spawners in freshwater. So those guys are the really aggressive ones. So we're worried about, and they have free range going up our fish ladder because they can squeeze through the grates. So we've done a lot of pumping of stomachs and examination. And we've determined we've never found a snail in the cutthroats. Okay. And so DES also manages the vegetation. So there's a Eurasian water milfoil in Capitol Lake. So historically, they used to drop the lake to kill the milfoil, but now they don't do that. So they either do it hand removing with divers, or they do a suction. But once the divers go in, especially dealing with all the milfoil, there could be a ton of New Zealand mudsnails in there. So all the equipment that touches the water, we make sure is properly decontaminated before they go anywhere else. Okay. And this is at the mouth of Percival Creek. So these are grates or fences. the bottom left picture. So we'll put all these fences to prevent the Chinook from straying in Percival because we want to go back to the collection facility by Falls Terrace. But then when we pull those grates out, you can see in that bottom right picture, all on the top of that, those are all snails. So we don't want to be transferring this hatchery equipment around too, so then we'll decontaminate that. And then basically anything that touches Capitol Lake, we're gonna get notified and we decontaminate. So this was last year. This was right southbound I-5, right where it gets off of 101. Truck driver, does anybody remember this one? The truck driver just went straight in. He crashed right, almost touching the water, but then we looked, it was like, oh, he's got snails on his truck. So then we had to decontaminate the truck before it could go somewhere else. Same thing with this car. This happened a couple of years ago. There's an accident. The car went right into the lake. It was only in the lake for about an hour, but it was saturated with snails. Right when it hit, the snails just started crawling all over it. Yeah. And then of course you guys duck dash. So part of the agreement, anything that all the drift boats, rafts, and all that stuff that touches the water, and even boots, after all the ducks are collected, then we'll go down and decontaminate everything. Decontaminate. Okay. So what does decontaminate means? It means to kill any organism on that equipment or watercraft. So the way we do it, and the most environmentally friendly, we know that there's a couple chemicals that will kill them, but the easiest way we do it is with hot water. So you see, that's just a hot water pressure washer trailer. We'll go down where you guys collect the ducks and then shoot everything with hot water. But we could also freeze them if we wanted to, or a chemical, but the hot water is definitely better. Okay. So here's just an example of our website. If you ever see anything, you just Google WFW, invasive species, you can report it. It's pretty nice. We have an app with Washington Invasive Species Council. And that's basically it. So, is there any questions? Yes, sir. Yes.
You said that there was a 5-mile radius of where you tested to make sure that the Zealand snail is dead. Is that also in Bud Inlet in the saltwater?
So, the 5-mile radius is for New Zealand mudsnails, and it's a presence survey only, because you can't scientifically prove for New Zealand mudsnails because of basically their size. You can't prove if they're not there right now. We don't have that type of survey protocol, so it's just a presence survey. And then we are not checking the saltwater. We're only checking freshwater. Kim?
Jesse, can they survive in fast-moving river water?
So, where they can, but they don't like it, because they're gonna try to get under rocks. So these are snails, so they're moving. Compared to a mussel that has the byssal threads that can attach, these guys can't clamp on too good at all. But so, where there's some streams that have a nice fast riffle, they're gonna try to find the slowest part of that if they're gonna be in there.
Are there any in the upper Deschutes?
No, there is none in the upper Deschutes. But at the mouth of the Columbia, we have right by Cape Disappointment State Park, Baker Bay area, and then Astoria, there's a couple pockets of them. So they've been able to adapt and live there. And with those tides, the flood and ebb, it gets pretty strong current. So they figured out how to survive, especially with that salt water, where we're getting ocean salinity coming in. So we're thinking when the salt water comes in, they're using that opercle, clamming up, and when it starts ebbing with that fresh water, then they're going out, then they're grazing. So they're pretty nifty little critters that adapt.
What kind of
Yes.
damage do they cause to the environment?
So What we can say about New Zealand mud snails is they're taking up forage and space. And so there's actually been one, so we know that when fish eat them, so these guys have no nutrient value at all. So in the Columbia River, of course, we have all our salmon coming down. So we've tracked some salmon, Chinook, juveniles. So when the juveniles are about yay big, they smolt and they go out to the ocean. So they were eating some of the snails, but they're actually losing weight because the fish is thinking, I'm eating, I'm getting nutrients, but there's no nutrients, so they're losing weight, and it's not too good. Yes?
Yeah, and for the benefit of the newer members, after the race is done, we are still not done with the ducks, as we have to lay them out in an area that is not close in proximity to any fresh water, but let them sit and bake in the sun for about a week. And so that's why when we get done, Bruce will take them out in his trailer up to his property, and he will lay them out and spread them. And then after a week of sitting out and basking in the sun with no rain or any condensation, then we go back out there as a club and have a barbecue and and clean the ducks and make sure we're not, if we find any that may still be attached, and take the numbers off. So that's the reason they have to sit out and bake and cook them for about 7 days.
Yeah, so it's been what, 7 years now that we've been doing this, and it's been a great cooperation with you guys, especially the multiple state agencies you guys have to deal with, us being DFW, doing the decontamination, going to the old Rotary, working with all the people. It's always been a fun time, so much appreciated.
Any more questions? Okay, Jesse, thank you. Don't go away yet. Don't go away. You've been here before and signed a book, have you not? You don't remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We gift a book to the South Sound Reading Foundation. If you sign it, that would be wonderful. We have a book here. This is, you know who that guy is? You've got kids. Cat in the Hats. Couldn't find one on snails, but this was on Beyond Bugs, all about insects. So it's pretty close. If you wouldn't mind signing that.
Carrie, you're going to have a hand.
And then Ken, you want to start working your way up? Okay, let's give Jesse another round of applause. Please,